Few battlemechs have stricken such fear as the ferocious monstrosity that will be covered in this video. Often 60-ton mechs, much like 40-ton mechs, are viewed as half-measures, appearing to be inadequately gunned, or poorly armored, or too committed to mobility that might otherwise be handled better by a lighter chassis. The mech in this video, however, has none of these flaws. Arguably even, this battlemech might be one of the best combinations of the armored triangle seen to date, at least as of the clan invasion, because of its strange bird-like appearance. Upon encountering it, the Draconis Combine dubbed it the Hagitaka, or Vulture, but its true name reflects its origins, and the nature of the cruel spirit of its creators. This video will be covering the Mad Dog. A heavy mech weighing in at 60 tons, the Mad Dog is one of the most dangerous adversaries to make an appearance in the Inner Sphere during the 31st century, and it has yet to leave the center stage of combat since its debut. In fact, it was so successful that there would be 3 official continuations of this battlemech, and despite that, the Mad Dog would continue to see active manufacturing all the way into the Ilclan era, though admittedly no longer with most of its traditional operators. First conceived during the 30th century, the Mad Dog's origins come from 2 separate battlemech designs that were married together by the infamous clan Smoke Jaguar. The first of these battlemechs was an early clan omnimech known as the Lupus, which was a clan Coyote heavy battlemech weighing 60 tons, and one which largely left service for frontline operations long before the clan invasion of the Inner Sphere, and mostly saw deployment only with the Coyotes themselves. The other major contributor to the Mad Dog's design was the ever-famous clan Timberwolf, a product of Clan Wolf. Smoke Jaguar technicians and scientists would combine the 2 systems together, taking the lower body of the Timberwolf and combining it with a heavily modified upper chassis resembling the Lupus, though the Mad Dog's arms would come to resemble more of the Timberwolf's design than the original arms of the Lupus. The resulting battlemech would be tested by the Jaguars, who clearly felt it met their requirements for a new 60-ton design. It would be named the Mad Dog as a deliberate insult to at the very least Clan Wolf, but possibly Clan Coyote as well, as the 2 clans were exceptionally close, and because the Smoke Jaguars appeared to be hostile to both of them. The first of these new hybrid monsters would begin to make their way onto the field in 2963, and it would be exceptionally successful, notably almost as renowned and successful as the Timberwolf in many ways. In terms of usage, it immediately was more popular among clan warriors than the Lupus, and would gain a following from many Mechwarriors that had a chance to pilot it, or had the opportunity to salvage it. It wouldn't take long before this design would begin to find itself in multiple clans, and before long it had in essence penetrated every clan in terms of adopting the mech into service. Interestingly, it wasn't just utilized by these clans through salvage or trade, but almost every single clan won the right to build and assemble them, or reverse engineered them to begin the process of building and assembling them for themselves. This battlemech, in essence, became a staple of every single clan. By the time of the invasion of the Inner Sphere, the Mad Dog was a common sight to behold inside of every Tumen. This also means that the Mad Dog would make up a large number of the heavy mech forces in many of the clans that participated in the invasion, with its sinister form lurking within almost every single battlefield in the Inner Sphere during the war. To put some of the success into perspective, Smoke Jaguar's brutal killer changed the composition and face of all mech forces throughout clan space. And let's examine a few reasons as to why. To start with, the Mad Dog feels like it doesn't cut any corners, and for the most part this is true. It leverages advanced clan technologies to create an absolutely devastating, hard-hitting, relatively fast for its weight battlemech, and one which isn't particularly poorly armored in spite of all of this. Most of the configurations see the Mad Dog take on powerful arm-mounted weapons, before filling its torso with missiles, or other brutal systems which help the battlemech hammer its opposition into ruins. Despite being 15 tons lighter than the Timberwolf, and not having some of the internal structure points or protection, it often hits almost as hard as its more famous stablemate. For many mech warriors and commanders, the Mad Dog is their first choice as a result, and during its time in the Kerensky Cluster and Pentagon worlds, serving in various trials, this Battlemech was a boon to the factions that deployed it. As another factor in all of this, the Mad Dog, as stated before, can deliver much of the same punishment that a Timberwolf can in terms of its raw offensive power. So for many clans, the Mad Dog, despite not being perhaps quite as good as its 75-ton counterpart, is just economically viable by comparison. More of them can be manufactured, at a lower cost in just about every respect, and all of those saved costs can go into manufacturing other mechs, or more of the Mad Dog platform. While this by no means meant that the Mad Dog was the default heavy mech in clan space, or that humans built their militaries exclusively on economic models like the Inner Sphere, it must have played a major role behind its popularity, especially with clans that had lesser industrial output as compared to the larger, more powerful clans. Even in these larger clans, it meant that the Mad Dog could more easily fill out the ranks, even if they still deployed more powerful battlemechs like the Timberwolf, or they were simply used as an escort for those battlemechs, or could easily join any star with them in it. These were the reasons why the Mad Dog became so incredibly widespread in clan space, and why their manufacturing was almost universal. Of all the clans, 3 of them favored it the most by the time of the clan invasion, namely Clan Smoke Jaguar, Clan Ghostbear, and a clan that didn't join the initial invasion, Clan Hell's Horses. During the attack on the former territories of the Star League, the Mad Dog would first be encountered when its originators, Clan Smoke Jaguar, faced off against the Draconis Combine in some of the most savage fighting in the entirety of the invasion. While the Combine was known for their brutality in war, the Smoke Jaguars would become even more well known for their viciousness and barbarism. It is from here that the Mad Dog, to the Inner Sphere, morphed into the name the Inner Sphere would know it by all the way into the Dark Ages and Ilclan era, as well as what many players themselves almost exclusively know it by, which is as the Vulture. Or, as the first of the DCMS's Mechwarriors referred to it upon seeing it, the Hagetaka. This vicious battlemech, within clan space, was a highly effective war machine, though one lending more towards offense than defense. In the Inner Sphere, this was another story in its entirety. The Vulture was a 60-ton battlemech that was on parity with most of the Inner Sphere's 60-ton designs in terms of its armored protection, and was a fast mover much like the Dragon or Quickdraw, but it was armed as heavily as an Inner Sphere assault mech of its time. These quick-moving heavies could overwhelm medium mechs with ease, and could corner light mechs before annihilating them with a barrage of pulse lasers or ER weaponry, mixed with missiles. In outing after outing, the Vulture could outfight just about anything put against it, outside of being put into confrontations against heavily armed assault mechs, or more numerous heavy battle mechs. But the Vulture isn't meant to do a straight fight with heavier, slower battle mechs which outnumber it. Unfortunately for this battlemech in the Inner Sphere, and for the clans and mech warriors that operated it, in the latter days of the campaign in the initial clan invasion, this is exactly what would happen. Mad Dogs would be deployed to key battles in the initial campaign, most notably Luthien and Tukayyid, where the worst case scenario would be put on display. In these battles of massed formations, set-piece battles, and battles of quantity, not quality, these battlemechs and most of their frontline Omnimech peers would be worn down, exhausted, beaten, and crushed in these key engagements. The Vulture, to the Inner Sphere, was an obvious threat in all of these battles, but it simply could not withstand the heavy incoming fire from battlemechs such as the Atlas, Thug, Stalker, and an assortment of others. With its creators, the Smoke Jaguars, The Mad Dog would be unable to influence the outcome of the audacious and daring Operation Dragonslayer, otherwise known as the Battle for Luthien. Luthien, the capital of the Draconis Combine, was one of the main objectives for Clan Smoke Jaguar in their invasion path. It had become imperative to take the world for several reasons. First, to crush the morale of enemy forces, whose defenses had stiffened across the theater, and with luck to potentially see the Draconis Combine fold as a nation-state. Next, it was important to increase their own personal honor in the eyes of the clans, as well as to display that they had achieved more than their rivals, particularly Clan Wolf. Across this capital world, piece by piece, these valuable, powerful, and all the same mortal Omnimech war machines would be tested in a series of brutal clashes. The Mad Dog and its Mechwarriors would rise to the challenge on the surface of the Combine's most important world, being a major component of the Jaguar's heavy mech forces, and a major combat machine in this struggle. Clan Battlemechs outgunned and outranged their Inner Sphere counterparts in every step of the planetary campaign, and the only real option to bypass this from the Inner Sphere was either to weather the storm of fire and advance, or lure the clans into closer entanglements where their range would matter less, and would result in the Inner Sphere leveraging their larger volume of machines and armor to overwhelm the clan forces. A major part of the clan's plan for success during Operation Dragonslayer was to quickly overpower their Inner Sphere counterparts, shattering their morale and forcing them to scatter. This overwhelmingly did not take place during the campaign anywhere on world, and instead each major assault turned into a brutal slugging match where the Inner Sphere forces, both mercenary and combine, would fight back and not disperse before the clan advance. During the Battle of the Basin Lake, in one of the clan's first significant thrusts to invest itself into the Imperial City, the Calhounds' 2nd Regiment's 3rd Battalion would face off against the Jaguar's 335th Combat Cluster. The Hounds were all that stood between the Jaguars and a breakthrough to the Imperial City, the main goal of the Jaguar assault. This was a pivotal engagement. The mercenaries, despite being soldiers of fortune, fought brilliantly in the defense, and regardless of the fact that they were outnumbered by clan machines, a death sentence on any battlefield during the clan invasion, they would hold out long enough to be rescued by the 1st Swords of Light Regiment, a combine unit few could have ever imagined putting their lives on the line to save mercenaries only days before the onslaught had begun. While the Hounds Battalion was withdrawn from the order of battle from severe losses as a result of the encounter, it had stood its ground, and similar engagements were increasingly the norm during the campaign. It was just one example of the Combine and mercenary forces fighting on, fighting against fear, fighting against the seemingly assured destruction which the clans would bring, and relying on one another in their times of need to stand against the astounding and devastating forces which had come to slay the dragon. Khan Lincoln Osis realized his troops were getting bogged down, which was preventing his forces from realizing their plan to slay their now bitter enemy. The Smoke Jaguars in their initial gains against the Draconis Combine had come to disrespect their opposition, believing them inferior in nearly every respect, perhaps save raw courage. And they didn't even hold this level of respect for the mercenaries they now faced as well. Soldiers of fortune were truly the least among anyone even pretending to be a warrior, even among the freebirths. Seeing an opening to push through the contested Keidoguchi Valley, Osis believed his forces would finally crack the defenders in one decisive blow, before moving to take the capital. Massing the majority of his forces, and the forces of his allies Clan Novacat, he would use this strength to smash through the last defenders of the Draconis Combine. It is important to note that the Mad Dog during Luthien was truly unmatched by anything the Calhounds or Combine forces could deploy. This fast-moving, reasonably well-protected heavy was available in significant numbers for the battle, and barring engagements with the dread-inspiring Atlas in drawn-out mid-range engagements, there was no single equal to it outside of perhaps the best which the Wolf's Dragoons could field. This was largely true for the entirety of the clan mech assets assembled too, not just the Mad Dog. The Nova Cats also deployed the Mad Dog themselves as a reliable heavy mech, and for much of the same reasons the Jaguars created it. Despite setbacks in the beginning of the operation, the clans remained confident that their genetically engineered Mechwarriors, piloting their superior Battlemechs, like the Mad Dog, would see them through to victory in the same way they had in almost every battle up until this point throughout the campaign, with only one defeat having struck them in the campaign up until this point, which had been the Battle of Walcott. Regardless of the validity of their beliefs behind their genetic superiority, the clan forces involved in the coming assault would be more than confident in their equipment, skills, and leadership in the savage invasion they now participated in. In the most pivotal battle of the campaign, which took place in the latter half of the planetary invasion in the Katoguchi Valley, the combined forces of Clan Novacat and Clan Smoke Jaguar, amounting to 5 clan galaxies, would face down the Draconis Combine Mustard Soldiery, Calhounds, Crescent Hawks, and Wolf's Dragoons, which all combined deployed a shocking 12 regiments in opposition. The defenders of Luthien, instead of breaking in the opening of the clan advance, which Osis had hoped for, once again held their ground. Even the mercenaries, drawing the clan forces into their own ranges before engaging in hellish firefights across the line. While the clan forces took a bloody toll on their opposition, fighting for their own survival more than mere honor in most cases as the clashes descended into desperation, more than just the trials and challenges the clans put themselves through. They would find quickly that this advance was contested at every turn. Combine warriors and mercenaries alike fought with incredible bravery once more, often in the face of opponents who outranged them, or could blast their mechs apart, which not only now bogged the clans down, but started to disable or destroy their own forces through attrition. Worse for the clans, even during the opening hours of the battle, the 145th Jaguar Irregulars had been annihilated by the forces of the Wolf's Dragoons Delta Regiment and their Combine employers. A counterattack launched by the Draconis Combine's 1st Genoshan and Calhound's 1st Battalion shattered the 315th Battle Cluster in a surprise upset and reversal, putting the entire operation into jeopardy shortly after. At this point, Osis himself began to see the cracks in his plan, and almost called for a retreat, seeing his forces beginning to buckle as their opposition, against all expectations and such a significant clan force, held. There would be one tragic event that extended the fighting, however, and extended the scale of the Jaguars' defeat. The 22nd Jaguars Regulars would make a breakthrough, and this held his order to retreat. This was the moment of a potential turn in their favor. His reserves, and the Novacat's reserves, had already been committed to the battle, but if the gap could be taken, they could still outmaneuver and defeat the defenders of the Imperial City. The only problem was, the 22nd Jaguar Regulars would exploit the breakthrough without proper reconnaissance. What awaited them was a layer of defenses. First, they would be caught in a deadly crossfire from the 2nd Legion of Huega and remnants of the Otomo, before these mechs pulled back when the clan forces managed to regain some of their bearings. Believing the defenders routed, the already withered regulars would advance into the Alpha Regiment of the Wolf's Dragoons, which would firmly shut the door on the 22nd Jaguar Regulars, annihilating the already worn unit in a swift, vicious battle. First to quit the field were the Novacats, who'd suffered horrific losses in the battle, in essence abandoning their allies, the Smoke Jaguars, and seeking to preserve what remained of their forces. The Jaguars would fight on, often isolated, as their former allies departed, with them following suit eventually where they could. The defeat was near total for the two clans involved, with extraordinarily high losses of Battlemechs, as well as suffering losses of huge numbers of veterans of the campaign so far, those with the necessary skills and experience to effectively fight the forces of the Inner Sphere. Their losses could be replaced with fresh recruits and machines, but it would still take time, and logistically the Jaguar occupation was becoming increasingly problematic. Of the 5 galaxies committed overall to Operation Dragonslayer, more than 3 were lost between the two clans, almost amounting to 4 galaxies altogether lost, with almost 2 galaxies being lost by the Jaguars, and more than one being lost by the Nova Cats. The clans, though, took their toll on the opposition throughout the campaign. The Mad Dog was a huge contributor to this violent clash, putting on display the true fury of the clans and their advanced technologies. Despite this, these proud Battlemechs were broken by the wall of steel and determination they were put up against, as the clan warriors who once believed themselves destined for victory and conquest were crushed by the dragon that they sought to slay. But that victory came at a high price for the defenders as well, as mentioned prior. The Calhounds had deployed 2 regiments to Luthien before the fighting. By the end of it, they had a mere 2 battalions, losing 70% of their fighting mech forces. The Wolf's Dragoons had arrived with 5 regiments in total, and after their hard-fought victory, only half of their forces remained. The dragon itself had been savaged in the battle, with regiments being decimated or nearly destroyed, in total losing 50% of their standing forces on the planet. The overall losses were extreme from the heavy fighting which took place. This means that the combined losses of the defenders, throughout the entirety of the campaign, amounted to almost 6 regiments lost. In the aftermath of the campaign, the Jaguars would rally, engaging in another series of brutal attacks on Combine worlds, seizing multiple planets. But it was a tired effort. The Smoke Jaguars were an exhausted force. Their replacement troops weren't to the quality of what they had lost. Resistance to their occupation of territory was intensifying, and their enemies seemed to be gaining in strength with every passing day. The offensive on Luthien, truth be told, had been the beginning of the end for Clan Smoke Jaguar. While the war did not end with it, it did irreparable harm to the Tumen of the Jaguars in terms of their experienced personnel, and did horrific damage to not only their public face and collective honor, but also badly mauled the morale of the Jaguars themselves, who began to question their abilities, and who began to feel the exhaustion of a drawn-out, fierce campaign. Clan Smoke Jaguar and their Khan, Lincoln Osis, believed they could simply break the back of the dragon and claim the greatest victory of any clan during the invasion. Instead, it was the Smoke Jaguars that were broken on the battlefields of Luthien. The 60-ton Clan Smoke Jaguar design known as the Mad Dog entered service in 2963, and would go on to become a staple of every Clan Tumen within the home worlds. Though it would originally only be produced by the Smoke Jaguars, this obviously changed before the clan invasion, and it became one of the most common heavy mechs deployed by the clans in frontline Omnimech formations. As far as its internal systems go, the Mad Dog possesses a standard internal structure, cockpit, and gyro. Very often Clan Omnimechs will possess Clan Endo Steel for their internal structure, but in this instance it was opted to not happen. This decision would have been made to save costs, resources, or to save on critical space on board. But all the same, the installation of this technology did not take place, meaning its internal structure weighs a full 6 tons. The successor designs of the Mad Dog, however, do utilize Endo Steel. For onboard electrical systems, this mech comes equipped with a Build OSJ-41 communication system, and more impressively, it comes with a Cat's Eye MD6 targeting and tracking system. The latter provides the Mad Dog with its only primary quirk at this time, which is an exceptionally dangerous one for this relatively quick, heavy mech. The quirk in question is the improved targeting medium-range quirk. This means when using the advanced rules, the Vulture, instead of having 2 negative modifier for firing at medium range, only has a 1 negative modifier for doing so. Medium range is one of the best engagement distances, and this is no different for the Mad Dog's variants. This means that it hits almost as accurately fighting at the medium range bracket as it does at point-blank ranges. One of the best qualities of many clan-heavy Omnimechs is their dedication to speed and maneuverability in most of their mech designs. This is no different for the Mad Dog, which makes significant tonnage and critical investments to ensure it can maximize this attribute while not hindering the mech otherwise. Equipped with a 9.5-ton Type I 300XL fusion engine, the Mad Dog can expect to reach a maximum speed of 86 km per hour, or 8 movement points in the tabletop game. This is the same speed as many of its Inner Sphere 60-ton peers, such as the Dragon or the Quick Draw. What's important about this is several things. First, Clan XL engines only take up 2 critical slots in the side torsos, providing it some survivability upon major damage to a side torso or its complete loss. This means that even if an Inner Sphere Battlemech reaches parity of weight through XL technologies, the mech doing so will be more fragile for having done it, while the Clan mech will be less strained in this regard. Second, many 60-ton heavy mechs from the Inner Sphere can often be criticized for being undergunned, meaning even if they do have speed, in the new era of warfare of the Clan invasion, they lack a great deal of punching power compared to their Clan counterparts. This makes the Mad Dog very key in this weight class and role. It is a heavy mech that moves like a medium mech, but hits harder than many Inner Sphere assault mechs, and almost all of that combination is owed to its ClanTech 300 XL engine. One area which Clan Battlemechs tend to struggle in is their ability to manage their potentially intense heat output. In many of its configurations, the Mad Dog is no different in these respects. To start with, for its cooling system, it has Clan double heat sinks installed, and comes with a base of 12, having invested 2 tons natively into the design. This means it will be able to cool 24 every turn. This is great for several configurations that it has on board, but truthfully, this means most variants of the Mad Dog must heat cycle their weapon systems in order for them to be used appropriately. The Mad Dog's weapons are meant to be fired almost always in some kind of order, rather than an alpha strike every turn, and its heatsink configuration largely reflects this. Some may argue that one place which the Mad Dog compromises is in its physical defense. I, in fact, disagree, as looking at it and comparing it to similar tonned battlemechs from both the Inner Sphere and clans, in mechs ranging from 55 to 65 tons, the Mad Dog doesn't actually have poor investment in defense. While the volume of tonnage may seem low, with the Mad Dog investing 8.5 tons into physical protection, the protection is Clan Compound SJ6CW ferro fibrous plating. This volume of armor yields the so-called Vulture 163 points of armor, which is the equivalent of 10 tons of Inner Sphere standard plating. This makes it as armored as the Inner Sphere's Hunchback, or Dragon, both which are considered not exactly easy to put down with firepower alone. This means that the Mad Dog can actually take a reasonable amount of incoming fire from its Inner Sphere or even Clan opponents, before its systems are compromised. Certainly, in a straight slugging match with an Inner Sphere assault mech, it may get worn down too quickly to overcome its adversary, but this would not be taking its mobility or tactical use into account. It is relatively fast, providing it with some defensive bonuses, and protecting it enough to prevent itself from being knocked out too quickly, barring extreme examples of fighting power disparities, the kind of disparities that the Mad Dog would face historically at the battles of Tukayyid and Luthien, and Operations Bulldog and Serpent. With so much tonnage saved in armor and engine weight, as well as heat sinks, the Mad Dog would have an enormous amount of tonnage available for omnipods. For a 60-ton battle mech, this war machine has a total of 28 tons worth of open pod space on board. That is nearly 50% of the mech's overall weight, even though it runs as fast as a dragon. ClanTech weapons and support systems are also consistently lighter and more lethal than their Inner Sphere counterparts, sometimes to insane degrees. This means that the Vulture can stalk an enormous amount of prey, both in clan space and in the Inner Sphere, really wherever it is put on the front lines. This expansive bulk of tonnage on board means that the Mad Dog can be equipped with heavy weapon systems, either those that are ammunition-fed or energy-based systems, and in multiple configurations that can deliver incredibly high rates of damage to targets. As a platform, the Mad Dog has such an amount of tonnage open to it that the clans would create 15 configurations for it, and for the Mad Dog 2 as well. As an aside, the Mad Dog 2 is just a normal Mad Dog, but produced in the Inner Sphere by Clan Go Spare. The only difference is that it looks slightly different due to the Rasalhague Dominion having to tool certain factories slightly differently, resulting in a mild change in appearance. In this video, I will be covering several of the Clan Invasion configurations at this juncture, but other, later variations will be covered later in the video. The most common configuration of the Mad Dog, and the one most depicted in art for the game, is the Mad Dog Prime. This devastating weapon of war is often compared to being a miniaturized archer, though truthfully the Vulture doesn't owe any of its direct ancestry to that Battlemech. It is equipped for quick, shock-based battles where the clan mech in question alternates between its primary weapon systems. First, its main attack comes in the form of twin clan large pulse lasers, with one mounted in each arm. These weapons have an extreme range as compared to their inner sphere counterparts, hitting all the way out to a stunning 20 hexes, and gaining 2 accuracy for being pulse weapons at all ranges. They also hit as hard as an inner sphere PPC, making them extraordinarily dangerous. Backing these up are a pair of clan medium pulse lasers, once more with one in each arm, and these too hit at a reasonable distance, namely 12 hexes, and deliver great returns for damage, that being 7 each. They are, again, 2 more accurate per range bracket and are able to really focus in on destroying mechs trying to directly engage the Mad Dog. Finally, the largest overall system on the mech, and the one most visible to people upon initially seeing the Mad Dog, are a pair of LRM-20 launchers, with one in each torso. These have no minimum range, unlike their inner sphere counterparts, and provide the Mad Dog with either indirect fire, or with brutal scatter damage attacks on targets which may have had opened up or exposed plating from pulse lasers or other nearby mechs. The Prime, despite having excellent damage output, and despite superb range, is not without its shortcomings though. First, its LRM-20 launchers only have 1 ton of ammunition per package, meaning that the pair of launchers only have 6 rounds of fire overall. Every single shot must count from these weapons as a result, which may put the Mad Dogs into precarious situations should they need them. This means that they must conserve this ammunition very preciously, as the mech's overall fighting ability drops dramatically without them. This also means that pilots can't take risky shots for fear of wasting ammunition. The other problem is, frankly, the Mad Dog Prime runs hot. Very hot. It has to carefully alternate fire between its various systems, managing it very carefully in order to prevent it from running extremely hot. It can fire its large pulse lasers and run without overheating, or it can fire its LRM-20 package and medium pulse lasers and still starts overheating, but only just. There are other configurations of fire it can do, but these are just the most straightforward examples. Many clan mechs, as mentioned prior, aren't simply there to alpha strike every turn, but the Mad Dog's potential heat output would make an alpha strike incredibly risky on the tabletop. This means that the Mad Dog Prime, despite being an incredibly powerful tool on the battlefield, requires a Mechwarrior or a mech commander who is going to allow it to play to its strengths while not getting it into too much hot water that will diminish it in the face of its enemies. It is a tightrope to walk, but the Mad Dog's pilots for almost 100 years in the Inner Sphere have managed that difficult task. It would be almost criminal to do an overview of the Mad Dog in depth, and its clan invasion overview, and not touch on the incredibly devastating Variation A. This configuration of the Mad Dog inverts much of what it is known for, and displays why 28 tons of clan omnipod space is so incredibly dangerous, as it is one of the most potentially devastating shotgun machines of its age. Deviating from the Prime significantly, its arm-mounted weaponry begins with a right arm-mounted clan ER PPC. This is arguably the most dangerous weapon in the game, and also providing it with long-range dedicated fire that cannot run out of ammunition during any trial or battle that it might be a part of. This, however, is the A's only energy-based weapon, and all others on board are ammunition-dependent systems. In the left arm, it comes with a well-fed LB-5X autocannon with 40 rounds of ammunition. This cannon can either fire cluster ammunition or solid shot ammunition. This is an extremely long-ranged weapon, and it pairs well with the clan ER PPC, even if its damage total can be low. What is truly horrifying though is not its arm-based systems, but rather its utterly destructive torso-mounted weapons. Taking advantage of the clan's extremely lightweight missile systems, the A configuration has a terrifying 18 SRM tubes per side torso, or rather, it has 3 SRM-6s in each of its side torsos. This means it has a total of 36 SRM tubes, which it can unleash at close range, and barely overheat doing so. Not all missiles will hit, but averaging 12 missiles per side torso, it can realistically land 20 to 24 missile strikes in a single volley, where all launchers hit. Which means these missiles will land with the ferocity of scoring several AC-20s in damage, and scattering across the entire target. This will potentially hit the head of the target, roll through armor criticals on the target, or scatter into weakened armor or exposed portions of the mech. It is a crit fishing machine, and will sandblast targets to death at medium range and close range. Only a fool would look upon the A configuration and view it as something to be taken lightly, especially given that it's not even entirely poorly fed ammunition-wise for its missiles, with a total of 4 tons of SRM ammunition giving it 60 rounds, or 10 shots per launcher when firing regularly. Medium and heavy mechs will simply vanish in a wave of horrifying clusters of missiles, and even assault mechs will fall before these strikes. The A is exceptional as well, in close quarters situations, like forests or cities. Under the right circumstances, this mech, supported well, could be the undoing of whole lances by itself. The last clan invasion variant that I'll be discussing in this portion of the video is the C configuration, which is one of the simplest, but demonstrates just how much power the Vulture has due to its more than reasonable quantity of dedicated pod space. The C variant is mostly built around the idea of simply building the Mad Dog into a long-range, moderate speed, heavily gunned sniper mech, removing the entirety of any missile payloads, and removing any and all other pod systems on board. It goes on to install 2 Clan Gauss rifles, with 1 in each arm. These rifles are also adequately supplied with 2 tons of ammunition per rifle. This level of firepower is very exceptional, and is even more exceptional when Zellbringen is not being followed. Each cannon fires a round that does 15 damage, which can headclip targets at extreme or moderate ranges. If these lucky rolls don't take place, the iron nickel rounds will pierce through armored plating, allowing other systems to exploit the damage in enemy mechs' protection. Against light mechs, which the Mad Dog can at least moderately maneuver to engage, these guns represent the absolute annihilation of these targets. The C, in honorable clan duels, still provides a battering ram of firepower that over the course of a trial will simply erode away their targets with repeated strikes. At medium ranges as well, whether it be fighting in dedicated real fights with support or a duel, this monster will more or less fire as if it were at close ranges, at least when using the advanced rules. And Gauss rifles have an enormous range to start with, making it scarily effective in this respect. Ironically, Clan Smoke Jaguar had looked forward to the Battle of Tukayyid as a means to regain their glory after Luthien, and defeating the Inner Sphere without having to continue to suffer the bleak, savage campaign against the Combine itself, which was the cause of depleting their resources. Tukayyid was not just a defeat for Clan Smoke Jaguar. Comstar, the last twisted legacy of the Star League within the Inner Sphere, placed its armies well, and worse, exploited clan traditions, honor, and foolhardiness in order to reach a decisive, conclusive victory in all but 3 theaters against the clans, when 8 clans were present. Shamefully for the Jaguars, they were among the vanquished, not even eking out the draw which the Jade Falcons had managed. In fact, of the most powerful clans to participate in Tukayyid, they would be the only fully undone force. Their own arrogance had been their undoing, given that they had bid away an entire galaxy of their invasion force in order to gain prestige, and as an attempt to sabotage their rivals. Ironically, they only sabotaged themselves. During the battle, the Mad Dog, one of the most impressive machines ever designed by Smoke Jaguar, and a mech which fought in all of the clan forces, ran into the same tactical and strategic problems it did on Luthien. The biggest difference from Luthien was that this time their Khan and their Sakhan were sidelined rapidly in the engagement, leaving their forces rudderless and without an overall commander on the field, resulting in confused responses to their deteriorating situation. Inevitably, they would be crushed underfoot on the battlefield. The defeat of the Jaguars even created a political crisis. as Brandon Hollowell was elected as Khan in the aftermath. But unbeknownst to the Jaguar Council, Khan Lincoln Osis had survived Tukayyid. This change was rectified quickly, though Hollowell accepted the role of Khan rather than challenging the returning Khan. Tukayyid would not only be another horrendous defeat for the clans as a whole, and particularly Clan Smoke Jaguar, but it would be yet another step towards their utter destruction. This time, the Smoke Jaguars, from their behavior, would be increasingly isolated by their fellow clans, even their traditional allies, the Jade Falcons. Isolated and alone, they would face down the Inner Sphere itself in the great battles to come after Tukayyid. At the forefront of these problems was fighting in the occupied territories, where they would find themselves opposed by the revitalized Draconis Combine Mustard Soldiery, which had gained a new sense of purpose and strength because of their victory at the gates of the Imperial City on the Jaguars' failed attempt to seize the planet of Luthien. The Jaguars never really gained sufficient resources in their captured territories, despite their vastness, and for a multitude of reasons. They were cruel and uncaring to the population, and as a result the population rebelled violently and participated in undermining their efforts to rebuild, and participated in insurgencies. The resources they had repurposed, therefore, were quite limited in their productivity. Retooling factories to build clan designs, like the famed Mad Dog, either did not take place, or were frustrated to such an extent that their output was minimal. More tragic for the clan, they were being raided routinely, first by their fellow clans, who had grown to resent the arrogant and disgraceful Jaguars, but also because it was increasingly known how weakened the Jaguars had become. There was barely restrained aggression from their increasingly committed and powerful enemy, the Draconis Combine, who made bolder and bolder raids into the Jaguars' Inner Sphere holdings. This made any attempt to rebuild all the harder, and that doesn't even take into account the major defeat that would take place as a result of an entire galaxy being destroyed against Clan Novacat during this period of time. This diminished their ability to recover further, and after such significant losses on Luthien, Tukayyid, and the general attrition of the campaign, as well as the losses they'd faced through simple attrition in the raids, and of prior offensives on various worlds, Clan Smoke Jaguar was beginning to look like a spent force, despite its leadership's best efforts. Lincoln Osis would be elected Ilkhan during this time, and had every intention of reigniting the invasion of the Inner Sphere, and this time in a way to benefit his clan most of all. Operation Bulldog and Operation Serpent would both be launched against Clan Smoke Jaguar in this environment, with the express focus and purpose of making an example of the exhausted clan. The Jaguars would fight bitterly as waves of forces from the reunited Star League, which had been reunited under the Great Houses in an effort to stop the clans, crashed specifically into the Smoke Jaguar occupation zone. Worlds were crushed as the Jaguar mechs were overwhelmed, even very capable and lethal mechs such as the Mad Dog. The offensive went in waves as worlds were snatched away from the Jaguars' grasp piece by piece, their warriors being killed or forced into humiliating surrender. To once more compound their problems, unfortunately for Clan Smoke Jaguar, Operation Bulldog in the Inner Sphere was not the only attack. Operation Serpent would strike at their very homes in clan space, with the new Star League unleashing its enormous fleet along with its equally impressive ground forces. In the Kerensky cluster, Clan Smoke Jaguar would meet its fate. First, in the battles leading up to their primary home of Huntress. Before that too was savaged by the overwhelming forces of the Inner Sphere's counterattack. This would lead to the Great Refusal, a contest between the Inner Sphere and the clans as to the fate of mankind in the Inner Sphere. This was a contest which the clans would lose, and they would be forced to halt their invasion and their ambitions. In the Great Refusal, Khan Lincoln Osis himself would be killed, and with him his last warriors. Clan Smoke Jaguar was no more. They were annihilated, even by clan standards. The Mad Dog served in every step of these campaigns, fighting on the side of its creators in their desperate bid for survival. This fast-moving, reliable, powerful Battlemech and its pilots would accomplish incredible feats of daring and bravery, but it would never be enough to stem the tide. Within the Inner Sphere itself, they would be broken by the assault forces of the Star League. which was headed by many forces from the Inner Sphere, but most notably involved a large portion of their bitter enemies, the Draconis Combine. On Huntress and in Clan space, the Vulture would face off against the best of the Inner Sphere, and much like its creators, the Smoke Jaguars, they would be undone by them as well. These proud Mechwarriors and their Battlemechs fought until they were almost entirely destroyed. But the Mad Dog would not die with its originators, nor would the clans as a whole, and in the Inner Sphere, it would find a new home outside of the clan homeworlds. In fact, in the hands of one of its primary operators. One of the clans which had performed very well during the clan invasion, in spite of their slow and steady advances, was none other than Clan Ghost Bear. This was one of the mightiest clans at the front line of the invasion, and had devoured parts of other clan-occupied territories in the Inner Sphere as well. This left them with most of the Free Rasalhague Republic, and of parts of the Draconis Combine. Even prior to the Great Refusal, the Bears had been starting the process of relocating all of their resources from the clan homeworlds back to the Inner Sphere. Warriors and civilians were relocated into the New Realm, as well as the great majority of their industry. Bergen Industries' main facilities on Ash Lane would begin producing Battlemechs for Clan Ghost Bear after their relocation, and this factory would be tooled and managed by the Bears more directly as well. It became the new home in the Inner Sphere for the legendary Mad Dog Battlemech, and these would begin to see production out of this facility in the 3060s. The Mad Dog had always been a favorite of the Ghost Bear's Omnimech forces, so it only made sense to begin producing this Battlemech at the time. There were some visual changes on the models produced in the region, however, creating what many dubbed to be the Mad Dog 2. This mech was functionally, and in all ways, a Mad Dog. Only its appearance slightly varied from the original. Still, this is where the Mad Dog found its new home in the Inner Sphere, being produced directly in the Inner Sphere by Clan Ghost Bear. Other clans still had their homeworld holdings for the most part, and there was a supply chain, albeit an extremely extended one, going from the clan homeworlds back to the Inner Sphere at least for some time. This would change during the 3070s with the Wars of Reaving, a conflict which the Ghost Bears largely weren't belligerents in, but their leaving of clan space had played a role in starting the conflict to begin with, by raising tensions by leaving their former enclaves open to be competed for. The Wars of Reaving would see wholesale destruction, and the annihilation or absorption of multiple clans, the most noteworthy among them being Clan Steel Viper, a clan which had been wholly thrown out of the Inner Sphere despite it being one of the invading clans. It's also noteworthy that Ilkhan Brett Andrews, the man who started the Wars of Reaving themselves, had been a member of Clan Steel Viper. The Wars of Reaving really meant that supply chains from the homeworlds were broken, as the only clans that remained were dedicated homeworld clans, and they were politically and ideologically dead set on isolation through violence, consolidating the dead clans' resources who had fallen during the war, or were ideologically of the belief that the Inner Sphere needed to be burned to the ground. This time also saw the rise and fall of the Society, an organization of clan scientists who had attempted to remove the warriors from power, and had wanted to recraft clan society into something which they could control. They too were ultimately undone. In the Inner Sphere, numbers of Mad Dogs were still widely available to most clans despite this breakoff, and trade with the Rasalhague Dominion ensured that they would still appear in other forces. It's noteworthy that the Draconis Combine also, after the wars with the Smoke Jaguars, and likely through trade with the Novacat enclaves within their borders, gained access to the Mad Dog to some degree for this time, though by the time of the Dark Age this had whittled away to functionally none of them remaining. In fact, in general, this seems to have happened to the Battlemech even within clan territories. New configurations of the Mad Dog would be built during the Federated Commonwealth Civil War, and during the Word of Blake's assault on the Inner Sphere, with Clan Ghost Bear taking up a major role in the destruction of the Word of Blake, believing they perhaps were harboring members of Clan Wolverine. The configurations from this time would be seen around the Inner Sphere depending on the availability of onboard components for the design. Inside of the Ghost Bear Dominion, the last major outing for the Mad Dog would be the Second Combine Dominion War, which was a major conflict that raged from 3098 through to 3101. It was started as a result of Novacat raids into the Dominion, which followed down an escalation chain into an open conflict, which became a savage war. It was a war which the Draconis Combine would lose to the Bears, with several of their worlds being annexed as a result of the raiding of the Clan Ghost Bear territories. This was an important war for the Bears, as it helped solidify their grasp on power in some ways, and helped unite the disparate people of the Dominion, as well as to pave the way for further developments of their civil society from what it had been. Things would begin to change for the Mad Dog after the creation of the Republic of the Sphere, an entity which itself had gained some numbers of Mad Dogs, or as they would refer to them, Vultures, over the years. In Clan Ghost Bear there would be changes too, with the Ghost Bears, with time, coming to culturally and diplomatically unify with the Rasalhagian people they occupied, and the two forming into a new union state, known as the Rasalhague Dominion. This state created a new unified government and a new mass shift in policies towards civilians within, who would be allowed to live much more normal lives, and with time, would eventually be able to cast off the shackles of the eugenics system which had so unfairly controlled the lives of the people within. Even with this, however, the Rasalhague Dominion would suffer uprisings from Rasalhagian nationalists, though these would be defeated several times. But, whereas the Rasalhague Dominion seemed to have thrived, by 3109, the Mad Dog 2 within Clan Ghost Bear would be upgraded, at a production level, to the Mad Dog 3, a distinct design using additional components within its chassis. While it looks very similar to the Mad Dog 2, it is quite different in terms of its weapons layout and battlefield presence. This Battlemech would be deployed by the Rasalhague Dominion more than any other faction, but trade would see it appear both in the Republic of the Sphere and in Clan Snow Raven, or the now Raven Alliance. This marked the beginning of the end of the Mad Dog 1 in wide service inside of Clan Ghost Bear, and with time, their aging fleet would be phased out or used up. By the time of the HPG Blackout, the Rasalhague Dominion was no longer an operator of the original design. In fact, many clans would begin to phase out the design. It would even begin to see a lack of use or production within Clan Wolf proper, as well as within the ever-mercantile Clan Seafox. New technologies would become available to the Mad Dog due to the advances made by the clans during the latter portion of the 31st century, resulting in a number of new configurations. For this era piece, I will be touching on several of these designs and how they use the qualities of the Mad Dog's pod space and other systems to maximum effect. Two configurations would appear during this time that used the cutting edge of the clan's ballistics and ammunition-fed technologies. The invention of the Hag, or the Hyper Assault Gauss system, was a true breakthrough for the clan forces during the Blakest era and beyond. In essence, this direct-fire weapon, this rapid-fire Gauss rifle, could shred through targets with a series of deadly and accurate attacks that do cluster damage and out to extreme ranges, all while not being hindered by anti-missile systems in the way that LRMs are otherwise. The E configuration embodies this most, with it having twin Hag 30s, with one in each arm, mirroring its ancestor design, the configuration C, in that it has two large Gauss weapons that are armed-mounted systems. These cannons could, in theory, do twice the damage of the original C variation, though it would be spread out across the target's entire chassis. This isn't the case, however, as the E system is subject to the cluster munitions rule, so not every round is going to hit the same place on the target. It is enhanced, however, by the Mad Dog's medium-range targeting quirk, making it more reliable at a good distance to simply shatter an enemy mech. It does, however, have an enormous drawback, insofar that it has only 4 rounds of ammunition for these two hungry, devastating fire systems. And once it is spent, the E is in fact naked. An evolution of it, deployed near the same time, is the Mad Dog F, which comes with a pair of Hag 20s, instead of Hag 30s. These are fed by 12 rounds of ammunition each, giving it a much longer functional lifespan on the battlefield. Better yet, it has 4 torso-mounted ER medium lasers to back this up should it deplete its stock of ammunition. This design is significantly more balanced in almost every respect, and is generally a more intimidating sight on the battlefield. Consistency and reliability are its strengths, while the E configuration seems to lack these features in favor of raw power. But it might just be a fool's power. Perhaps the closest to the original Prime, the Configuration H utilizes new technologies to allow the Mad Dog to potentially thrive in the era of warfare of the late 31st century. This means it can fulfill much of the same roles of the original, but is tweaked in certain terms to try to provide different value. First, it addresses its ammunition deficiencies by reducing its LRM-20s to LRM-15s with Artemis 4 fire control systems, and installing a second ton of ammunition per launcher, giving it 16 rounds of potential fire from these impressive missile launchers. This means unlike the Prime, which can deliver deadly salvos but has to be very careful, the H can fire reliably most turns, and can take risks where needed. The H also drops its pulse lasers in favor of a new interesting technology, even if it is one that is very hot, which is the energy system known as heavy lasers. These lasers have the same range as their inner sphere counterparts, but do severe damage for their weight and range, but at the cost of very high heat, and a small penalty to accuracy. The heavy large laser alone does more damage than a Clan ER PPC, for instance, but only weighs 4 tons. The heavy medium laser generates 7 heat each, but hits as hard as a standard inner sphere PPC. The H installs 1 heavy large laser in the right arm, and 3 heavy medium lasers in the left arm. This assembly of firepower is extremely dangerous, and can deliver devastating energy weapon assaults, but it is mostly restricted to closer ranges. In order to try to cope with its enormous heat burden of these 4 lasers, the H does go on to install 5 additional double heat sinks, bringing it to 34 cooling every turn, which is still not enough to fire all 4 lasers at once and be heat neutral, but it is enough to fire either the large laser or the medium lasers and still fire its deadly missile packages. Cycling weapons, as before, is key to success in Battletech, and the H has excellent systems and excellent options for cycling. In the new Ilclan era, the Mad Dog is beginning to disappear from the inner sphere in the service of many of its traditional operators. Once fielded by every single clan, and even the Draconis Combine, it is now only in the hands of a few clans. Part of this is in fact because Clan Seafox is producing a newer, more advanced variant of the Mad Dog, known as the Mad Dog Mark IV, or the Vulture 4. This Battlemech is produced on Tukayyid by the plant SFF-TU1. While Tukayyid is a Rasalhague Dominion world, it has a Seafox economic enclave on it, allowing for it to be used as a manufacturing center. From here, they would build and distribute the Mark IV, which is a very different approach in terms of its loadout, focusing on survivability over firepower, unlike most other variants of the Mad Dog. It is commonly seen across the entirety of the inner sphere, by houses, clans, and mercenaries as a result. These new Mad Dogs, along with the Mark IIIs built in the Dominion, would see combat very much during the Ghost Bears fights with their neighbors, as well as during the collapse of the Republic, where it would be used both by the Republic of the Sphere and the invaders seeking to overthrow them. But even then, despite this new model seemingly overwhelming the inner sphere in terms of its usage, the original Mad Dog still has a few homes, at least with some of its original operators. The Scorpion Empire still operates these, and may still manufacture them, though there isn't much information on this at all. The Empire isn't quite as advanced as many of the other regions of clan space in the setting, and likely doesn't have the ability to acquire the Mad Dog 3 or 4 in real numbers, and certainly doesn't produce either of these mechs. Still, it is in service with them, and it may or may not be manufactured directly by them. The Raven Alliance is another place where the Vulture still has a home, but it does have an inflow of newer chassis variants of these Battlemechs from the Ghost Bear Dominion, where it imports the latest models, so for how long they'll continue to operate it is unknown. It does not produce the venerable Mad Dog 1 at this time, and will likely use up their remaining stocks over the coming years. But finally, there is a clan that not only still deploys the Mad Dog, but has doubled down on investing in it, and are using it in their tumen as they wage wars across the Inner Sphere. Clan Hell's Horses has always had a favorable impression of the Mad Dog Battlemech, from their time in clan space, all the way until their arrival in the Inner Sphere after the clan invasion. It fits the aggressive nature of the clan in many respects, and worked exceptionally well with their combined arms doctrines. In fact, the Hell's Horses would later develop a doctrine known as the Mongol Doctrine, which involved the use of light cavalry tactics in order to emulate much of what the Mongols from ancient Terra had tactically used during the medieval period. Clan Hell's Horses pioneered this doctrine, and the Mad Dog still has a place within it, along with other various war machines. Fast enough to keep up with battle line heavy formations, as well as fast enough to overwhelm most Inner Sphere targets, or having the teeth to bring battle against some clan heavier mechs, which the horses may be facing. The Mad Dogs still eked out a niche in their tumen, and would remain a favorite of theirs. The planet of Svarstad would be the new home of the Mad Dog, where it is produced and built by Clan Hell's Horses. It was chosen because it was a known quantity for their Mechwarriors, it was easy to manufacture, it was well known, and it was generally considered a safe bet. The Hell's Horses themselves don't always operate the most advanced, cutting-edge new chassis as compared to many of their peers, but they do still innovate in terms of new configurations and tactics, as demonstrated by the Mongol Doctrine. In fact, the Mongol Doctrine itself would have a more extreme version of it, taken by many Mechwarriors within Clan Hell's Horses, and unfortunately for the Inner Sphere, it would bleed into other clans beyond. This mutated doctrine, which became a belief, revealed that the clans were in fact designed to be like the Mongols by their founder Nicholas Kerensky himself, who would have embraced them, taking on the harshest components of Mongolian warfare and culture. This use of widespread cruelty and terror tactics, and the rejection of anything resembling honor, were a cornerstone of this mutated doctrine. While this ideology exists in Clan Hell's Horses, it was not so pervasive that it was able to capture or take over the entirety of the institution of Clan Hell's Horses, and more moderate voices, for the most part, kept these extremes from dominating every military engagement, as well as the political leadership. Unfortunately, Clan Jade Falcon was not quite as lucky. The doctrine would be embraced by the Falcons, and hardliners within would become enamored with it. The most notable of these figures was a woman named Malvina Hazen. A capable leader, she embraced the wholesale viciousness of the worst ideas around the group of hardliners, and would use these terror tactics to great effect for her own power. She would become Khan of Clan Jade Falcon, in essence, capturing the entirety of the institution of the clan and turning it towards this new, savage policy. People were slaughtered across the Inner Sphere in her blood-fueled conquests, as she devoured portions of House Steiner, and even raided and attacked the Rasalhague Dominion, though her greatest victims would be the Republic of the Sphere, as she led her horde on a rampage into the realm at the core of the Inner Sphere. More tragically for millions of people in the Inner Sphere, the warriors went along with it, if only because it meant more honor for themselves in their own eyes, even if that honor was tainted to those in the outside world. Only when the warrior caste itself began to be consumed by Malvina's desires and ambitions for conquest and destruction, did anyone even begin to seemingly imagine a world past her vision. She would be defeated on Terra. However, with her defeat, the terror-fueled Mongol tactics appeared to have declined within the clans. Though, the horses themselves continue to operate the original ideas behind it, and some of their more ruthless commanders may still align with many of the ideals that Malvina used on the battlefield, unleashing terror at every turn, victory through any means, and through sheer shock, horror, and viciousness is still something one might see when the Hell's Horses are unleashed, but only under the right circumstances. All the same, the Mad Dog will still be a part of this organization, as it has yet to be replaced within the Hell's Horses. It will be the mount for the riders of their host, and will be a savage one at that. And as a major fighting force in the Ilclan era, the Mad Dog has already seen action in this latest era, through Clan Hell's Horses. With Alaric Ward declaring himself Khan of the declared Ilclan, Clan Wolf, most other dominant clans within the Inner Sphere would in some way acknowledge this, from Seafox and Snowraven to Clan Ghost Bear. The force that discounted this in its entirety was Clan Hell's Horses. In fact, they rejected it so wholly and completely, they had every intention of launching a grand campaign that would annihilate the remnants of the Jade Falcon occupied territories, which had been largely left defenseless, and they would launch themselves at the newly declared Ilclan to crush it beneath their hooves. Operation Stampede was put in place by Khan Gottfried Emerald, a man viewed as more of a politician than a warrior, and it would be launched against the former Jade Falcon occupation zone first, and the shattered splinter states that now inhabited it, as well as against House Steiner and the mercenaries that supported it. In this crash of a conflict, the horses would capture many worlds, but unfortunately they would prove to be logistically hampered, and poorly prepared for much of the fighting that took place. Worse yet, they lost several major engagements that should have seen them achieve victories, in fact. This resulted in Operation Stampede, their moment of great conquest and preparations for their true objective, Terra, becoming little more than a roar that failed to impress their enemies, or the horse's warrior caste. So much so that Khan Emerald would be killed by his Sakhan, Folk Lanasirna, who would reorganize his forces and seek to restore the horse's reputation, and make good on their plans to challenge the so-called Ilclan at the heart of Terra. During this campaign, the Mad Dog would be a part of the Tumen in its latest configurations, some of which are exceptionally dangerous, even for an older chassis such as the Mad Dog. It still has an abundance of tonnage to utilize for weapon systems, and with its new technologies, and while operating under the horse's doctrines, it is more than an effective weapon system. In other words, the Mad Dog still has a kick to it, despite showing its age as compared to some of its peers. And the Hell's Horses Tumen, now that it is being reorganized for a continued, more effective campaign, is still likely to use it to even greater effect in the coming battles against the Lyran Commonwealth and the breakaway states of the former Jade Falcon occupation zone, because this is the frontier of the latest major conflict which it has been used in, and unless Clan Hell's Horses replaces it, this won't be the last time it is used in the horse's relentless march towards Terra. The 32nd century of warfare has been a terrifying one in the Inner Sphere. Despite lower intensity conflicts marking much of the beginning, all the way through until the 3140s more or less, new weapon systems and innovations appear consistently throughout, or at least the greater proliferation of these once extremely rare weapons or defense advantages. Even clan tech now consistently falls into the hands of the Inner Sphere, who produce it themselves. The Mad Dog needed to be made more competitive in this environment with new configurations, all while still using the most effective ones from older generations. The horses would create several devastating variants, with its significant pod space, leaning into the fact that the Mad Dog does tend to have more critical, and more often more spare tonnage than the Mad Dog 4, and tends to have more criticals and costs less than the Mad Dog 3. Another modernization attempt on the Prime variant, the T configuration is more about providing the system with more tonnage efficiency and sustainability at the cost of accuracy. To start with, it has one extra double heatsink on board to help it manage its heat load, which is very helpful in assisting it manage its cycling of weaponry. Next, it runs a pair of ER large lasers, with one in each arm, mirroring the old pulse lasers of the original, and runs a pair of ER medium lasers, replacing the medium pulse lasers in the same way. These go further, but they are less accurate in each range bracket. But they do save on tonnage and do similar damage. With the saved weight from these adjustments, the T invests in updating its missile package on board. It has a pair of LRM-20s mounted in the torso, and they have been updated to modern standards using Artemis 5 control systems, making their missile payloads much more devastating, even more so than if they were using standard Artemis 4. Then, it solves the Mad Dog's extremely limited ammunition payload, having 12 rounds of fire for these launchers instead of 6, making it able to stay in the field and hammer targets for twice as long. Even better yet, it can take riskier shots without wholly risking the mech depleting its ammunition so rapidly that it may not be able to find use for its launchers in short order. This is a superb update over the original, but the Prime, due to its pulse lasers, may still be a useful mech for the horses to operate, but the T is still most definitely superior in many circumstances. A fascinating configuration that attempts to strike a balance between close range fire as well as hitting at long range, albeit with limited sustainability for its ammunition-fed systems. The G configuration of the Mad Dog is the latest attempt to do this. For close range engagements, it comes armed with 3 right arm mounted ER medium pulse lasers and 2 right torso mounted SRM-6 streaks. It will run hot firing all of these in unison, but this salvo between pulse lasers and SRMs is a brutal one, especially after targets have been softened up by its long-range weapons. To go into its longer-range weapons, it has a left arm-mounted Clan ER PPC, with all of its devastating hole-punching ability. Then it backs this up with a left torso-mounted Streak LRM-15, which acts as a crit seeker after the PPC has opened up plating. All of the missile systems on board are Streak in an attempt to reduce its consumption of ammunition on failed attacks, but it is still light on supplies all the same. It has 8 rounds of LRM fire, and approximately 7 rounds of SRM fire if all missiles hit. Its lasers and PPC are a superb backup and complement, so even if these are expended, it can still fight. And truth be told, the Mad Dog isn't protected enough in the current era to likely survive such a long engagement under these heavy fighting conditions in all likelihood, especially at closer ranges. But all the same, it is still a fascinating attempt to bring the Mad Dog into a more versatile role with regards to both weapons ranges and the kinds of tools it can engage targets with. The I variation introduces a long-range sniper variant of a mech with some serious teeth, and it has a fascinating upgrade only seen on this mech, at least to my knowledge so far in the setting. This may change with newer mechs coming out over time, but it is interesting to see all the same. First, it introduces 3 more heat sinks on board, giving the Mad Dog the ability to cool 30 every turn. For its primary weapon system, it has a left arm mounted Clan ER PPC, but that PPC is equipped with a capacitor. This is something that hasn't come up yet in many of my videos, but it's important. But more importantly, this is something that isn't typically done to a Clan ER PPC. A Clan ER PPC is already a serious threat of a weapon. It has an extreme range and does 15 damage, as much as a Gauss rifle. What the capacitor does is that it can be charged, so long as the PPC isn't fired for 1 turn. With this charge in place, the next time the PPC is fired, it will generate 5 more heat, but do 5 more damage. This means that the Clan ER PPC on this Mad Dog, if fired in this way, doesn't do 15 damage. It does a massive 20 damage, as much as a direct hit from an AC-20 autocannon shell. Just up to a distance of 23 hexes, which is absolutely deadly. The PPC is backed up by a pair of rotary AC-2 autocannons in the right arm with 90 rounds of ammunition. RACs fire rapidly, even more rapidly than ultra autocannons, and this means under ideal conditions, without a jam, these 2 autocannons can fire 12 times in 1 round, doing intense scatter damage to targets at very long ranges. This mech is a brutal sniper, especially as targets come into medium ranges due to its targeting quirk, and is fast enough on its own to often get out of trouble should it be hunted down by mechs trying to counter it. It is a ruthless and brutal sniper that punches enormous holes in enemy mechs with an overcharged PPC, before battering them with a high-intensity salvo of autocannon fire. Terrifying. The last configuration to talk about is something that is fairly predictable in some senses. The V configuration has arm-mounted lasers, as one would expect with 2 medium pulse lasers and 2 ER medium lasers. It then adds heat sinks to help with heat management. This is all expected and good. It has an LRM-20 system mounted on the left torso, which gives it some crit finding ability at long range, though it is not enhanced in any other way. It has 12 rounds of ammunition to fire that LRM as well, which is respectable. This seems par for the course, with the Mad Dog now more or less being complete. But there seems to be an abundance of spare tonnage. Where could this be invested into, one may wonder? Almost bizarrely, but most definitely not. It invests this weight into an enormous Arrow 4 artillery missile system, located in the right arm and right torso. The Arrow 4 is typically found on mechs dedicated to its usage, and the mixed configurations of the Vulture is perhaps a bit awkward regarding it, though this is an extremely potent weapon, especially on relatively quick platforms like the Mad Dog, that can fire this weapon in a safe distance, reposition, and if ambushed or attacked, it has a reasonable chance of defending itself with its series of closer range weaponry. If the fight gets close enough while firing this artillery system, preferably with the help of recon mechs using tag to guide its missiles to targets, it can also engage with its LRM system. The Arrow 4 goes significantly further than just some LRMs, and it can engage targets so long as they are being guided, in essence, or it's using ammunition types which can fire unassisted. It is a strange variation, but not one without value, bringing artillery support to the battlefield, while still being less vulnerable than, say, a dedicated Arrow 4 vehicle, or even the clan's most dedicated artillery mech, the Naga, a machine which few clan warriors ever truly favored. The Mad Dog V is something that is truly unique and effective. It was the British Army that first deployed modern armor on the battlefield during the First World War, unleashing giant landships seemingly to roll through the bloody, mud-drenched fields of the trenches of Western Europe in a bid to change the conflict's outcome in their favor. Within a generation, every major nation on Earth seemed to have their own tanks, their own armored vehicles, and they were producing them domestically for their own chances to use them to their advantage. Though not a perfect allegory, the Mad Dog is very much like this, or perhaps even the ancient triremes of the classical era, with most nations copying the design at its height wherever possible in order to gain the same advantages for themselves. This 60-ton Battlemech changed the very composition of every clan Tumen long before they entered the Inner Sphere. Its cost, reliability, omnipod space, mobility, and even some degree of durability all played in its favor after its introduction from Clan Smoke Jaguar. The Jaguars captured lightning in a bottle with this mech design, and created a mech that was so useful that other clans swallowed their pride and took it for themselves. And not simply a few clans, but all the clans. Every one of their compatriots who could see the value of this machine for what it was, produced it for themselves. Clans such as Ghostbear and Hell's Horses understood it well enough that they used it very frequently even. In fact, both would embrace the design so wholly that they would carry on its legacy even after their migration to the Inner Sphere, with the Horses being the last clan to build the original, and the Bears innovating on it, evolving the design more thoroughly to try to embrace modern changes to their doctrine, and to the evolving state of warfare around them. It fought in every major clan campaign of the Inner Sphere, in both victories and defeats, and lurked over the Inner Sphere Mechwarriors like vultures waiting to prey upon their victims. Both of its main successor designs are incredibly useful and powerful as well, being great mechs in their own right, and seeing broad adoption. The death of Clan Smoke Jaguar, the originators of the design, did not change anything for it. By the time of their destruction, 100 years after its introduction to the clans in essence, it had become so widespread and so commonly used in warfare due to its incredible features that it long outgrew its first masters. In many ways, perhaps the Mad Dog and its successors are the true legacy of Clan Smoke Jaguar to the people of the Inner Sphere. even more so than the lapdogs using their name on Terra. The Smoke Jaguars were ruthless, brutal, efficient killers, much like the Mad Dog. They reveled in warfare and destruction, and while the Mad Dog has no emotions itself, nor any feelings on the matter, from being a simple mech design, it can be used for everything the Jaguars ever wanted or dreamed of. Each one of them, as they lay waste to their enemies, is an echo of the wrath and rage of the clan which was destroyed by the Inner Sphere. Even now, 100 years after its arrival, it still lurks across parts of the Inner Sphere, as do its successors. A dangerous war machine in the hands of anyone who is looking to stalk their prey. The Mad Dog is a masterpiece of violence, a crime against peace, and the legacy of killers, and one which will linger in the Inner Sphere for decades or centuries more. It is the beast that asks for those to come and see, and hell follows with it. Thank you for joining me here today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. For real. I know it's annoying to hear me ask that, but it does help the channel, I promise. Also, if you want to support this channel and what I do, there is a join button to become a channel member. Channel memberships allow me to work on these kinds of videos, these enormous videos sometimes, and gives me the flexibility to really dig into some of these designs and other subjects. I really mean it when I say these videos are only made possible because of viewers like you. Just as a few points here in the end roll, I want to thank everyone who helped me gather gameplay footage for this video on stream. You were all amazing, and I sincerely thank you for your contribution. I'd also like to thank Art of Battletech for letting me know I could use a few of his in-game shots to get different images. He also let me know that a lot of the textures and modeling used on the Mad Dog modification for Mechwarrior 5, which is what we used to gather gameplay footage for it, was done by Alan Yeho, and a huge shout out should go out to him as well. Links will be in the description to both of their pages that I'm aware of. And finally, if you have come to appreciate this killer among mechs, this Mad Dog, this Vulture as it were, this 60-ton monster, you can find this model in plastic in the Battletech Heavy Striker Star box, where you will find it and 4 other Battlemechs. A link will be included in the description below to Catalyst Game Labs if you'd like to order it for yourself, or if you'd just like to know which box it comes in order to order it from your local game store. The resources used to make this video will also be listed in the description below. Well, that was a big video to make. It's much longer than I originally anticipated, but I think it's just such an important design, and is such an important design for the Smoke Jaguars, Ghost Bears, and Hellsources that I really felt I needed to add more to it. It let me talk about a bunch of cool conflicts, and its history is so interwoven with individual factions in individual eras that it felt like a great place to deep dive. Alright everyone, that's it. That's the video. I hope to see you all in the comment section below, and I hope you all enjoy your weekend.